Welcome to Vocab Unit 6. Your first root is chron, which means time. Your first word is anachronistic. If you remember, this root "and" means not, so anachronistic means not in its correct time. So it's an adjective. The official definition is characteristic of something or someone that is not in its correct historical time. You may remember is what I just told you. Your sample sentence is, in the movie Braveheart, the Scottish warriors wore kilts, which is anachronistic, as the kilt was not invented in Scotland until 200 years after the death of William Wallace. So when there's something in a movie, for example, that wouldn't have existed at that time, that would be anachronistic. So here we have a maybe Revolutionary War battle or a Civil War battle, and a woman on a cell phone, right? So if she were in that movie scene, that would be anachronistic because there were not cell phones during the Civil War. Your second chron word is chronological, which is an adjective, and it means arranged in order of time. So, for example, timelines go in chronological order, right? They have dates on there, and they go in order. So if you were asked to put events in chronological order, you would put them in the order in which they happened. Synonyms are sequential and consecutive, and antonyms are random or intermittent. Your sample sentence is, most stories run in chronological order, but stories with flashbacks do not. So most of the time when you're telling someone a story, you try to tell it in chronological order. If you forgot a detail or wanted to go back and explain something that happened first, you might go out of chronological order. Your next root is ven or vent, which means come. And your first word is convene, which is a verb, and it means to come together or assemble. So if you remember this root con, it means with or together. So it literally means to come together. Your synonyms are summon and gather, and your antonyms are disperse and dissemble. You may remember, I just talked to you about that, it means come together. And your sample sentence is, because of the construction in the principal's office, his staff had to convene in the library instead of in his office. So when people come together for a meeting, they convene. When you come together for English class, you convene in your teacher's classroom. And over here, it looks like we have a lot of frogs who have convened or come together. A convention is a noun, very similar to the word convene. So people convene to form a convention, or they would convene for a convention. It's like an assembly of people. So that's that first definition, a formal assembly. There's also a second definition, which is an accepted rule or method, and we'll get to that further down. So synonyms are conference or agreement, and antonyms are discord. Your first sample sentence is talking about the assembly, so people coming together. The Star Wars fans looked forward to the sci-fi convention in Atlanta, so that would be somewhere where a lot of Star Wars fans or science fiction fans would all come together and have a large formal assembly or a large formal meeting. These people here look like they're going to some kind of sci-fi or fantasy convention. And looking at the second definition, an accepted rule or method, it gives you the second sample sentence. The Olympic snowboarder defied convention by wearing a skin-tight suit instead of the normal padded gear. So convention, what's normally accepted, would be to wear padding. They defied convention by wearing a skin-tight suit. You also sometimes will talk about something like writing conventions. So writing conventions are things like correct capitalization, correct punctuation, writing in paragraphs, right? So we ask you in English class to follow writing conventions. There are conventions for speaking in class, which is that you raise your hand and wait to be called on, right? So anything that's accepted, an accepted method of doing something. Your next root is D, which means down or away. Your first word is decipher. It's a verb, and it means to make out the meaning of or to figure out. Your synonyms are decode or interpret. I think decode works really nicely as a synonym to remember it. There's a code, this is binary over here, which would need to be decoded to understand it. Your antonyms are encode, put into code, and complicate. Your sample sentence is, even decades later, nobody had been able to decipher the mysterious codes of the Zodiac Killer, so no one could figure them out or no one could decode them. Your next word is derail, which means to cause something to fail. Your synonyms are hinder and thwart, and your antonyms are aid and support. Your helpful hint is a good one. It says, yes, this can literally mean away from the rails like a train crash, but more generally, you can derail plans, progress, an election, etc. So if a train derails, the train goes off the rails. But we're more interested in using it in terms of this storm over here derailed our plans because we were going to play Frisbee and then there was lightning. Or the traffic jam derailed our dinner plans because we missed our reservation. Or our progress was derailed when the internet wasn't working and we couldn't do our project. The sample sentence is Mike and Jane's plan to paint their front door over the weekend was derailed by the relentless rainstorm. Your next root is sense or scent, which means feel. Your first word is dissent. It's a verb. It means to differ in opinion, and it can also be a noun meaning a differing opinion. So you can say I dissent, and in this way, it is the antonym of concur, right? So you can say I dissent, or you can say he read his dissent, and that would be the differing opinion. So your synonyms are object and protest, and your antonyms are agree and concur. Helpful hint, a protester is often commonly referred to as a dissenter. So they are dissenting, so you can say they are dissenting, or you can say they express their dissent. They express their dissent, right? Either way, as a verb or as a noun. Your sample sentence for a verb is the vote passed almost unanimously with 90 votes in favor and only 3 dissenting. And then your sample sentence for a noun is her refusal to show up to work on time in protest of her boss's requests went far beyond respectful dissent. So respectful dissent would be saying something politely. This is not respectful dissent, not showing up to work. Your next word is resent. It's a verb, and it means to feel displeasure from a sense of injury or insult. Your synonyms are begrudge and dislike. Your antonyms are welcome and like. Your sample sentence is even though she wasn't as talented as her teammate, she still resented not being selected as the team's starting shortstop. So if you resent something, you often have a grudge is a way to think about that word. So this cat looks like it resents something. He resents, I don't know, not getting fed, right? He's like upset about it and he's not going to forget about it anytime soon. Dis means ill, difficult, or bad. And your first word is dysfunctional, which is an adjective, and it means not performing normally or malfunctioning. Your synonyms are defective and useless, and your antonyms are useful and productive. So this is a pretty easy word to remember in that dis means ill, difficult, or bad, and then functional means working. So if something is not functioning or not working, it's dysfunctional. Your sample sentence is Hank was furious. The DVD player that he bought on eBay was dysfunctional and would not play most of his DVDs. So you can use it to literally talk about something that's not working. You often will hear people talking about dysfunctional relationships or dysfunctional families. So this looks like a dysfunctional relationship or friendship or whatever is going on over here because the woman over here is punching that man, right? So that's not a healthy functioning friendship or a healthy functioning relationship. It looks like their relationship is a little bit dysfunctional right now. And your next word is dystopia. It's a noun, and it means a society characterized by absolute human misery. Your antonym is utopia. So a utopia is a perfect society. A dystopia is a society in which everything is going wrong. So you see this like robot over here, right? If he's shooting people with like his little lasers, he might be living in a dystopia or a dystopian society. Your sample sentence is young adult fiction often depicts a dystopia where a government has gained too much control over individuals. So if you think about a society like the Hunger Games, it's set in a dystopia. I'll just also want to give you the term dystopian. So you could say a dystopian novel. So the Hunger Games is a dystopian novel. You can also say, instead of saying a dystopia, you can also say that there's a dystopian society. And that's really the same thing as a dystopia. Graph means right. And your first word is epigraph. It's a noun. It means an inscription, especially on a building or statue or at the beginning of a poem or chapter of a book. So here's an epigraph over here. This one is something that's written on a statue. You might also see an epigraph at the very beginning of a book. Helpful hints. Epigraph is not to be confused with epitaph, which is an inscription on a tombstone or monument in memoriam of a person, or epithet, which is an abusive word or phrase. So just to remember which word we're talking about, we have graph in here, which means write, right? So it's something written on a building or a statue or in a book. The sample sentence: the poet added a small epigraph to his poem between the title and the first line, explaining the poem's historical context. Your next word is graphic. It's an adjective, or it can also be a noun. As an adjective, it means vivid or written or drawn. And as a noun, it means a computer-generated image. So there's kind of three definitions going on in there. Your synonyms are visual or explicit, and your antonyms are unclear or vague. So, looking at breaking down these definitions, graphic violence is vivid. So, you might have a movie rated R for graphic violence, right? So that means it's not like suggested violence. It's like there's blood on the screen. It's vivid. All right. Written or drawn gives you that term graphic novel. So a graphic novel is one that has like comics in it, right? That tells a story through pictures as well as through words. So graphic novel is one composed of drawings. And then this third one, a computer-generated image, a graphic, is over here, right? So you might, if you were doing a project or you're making a PowerPoint, you might include graphics in it. All right, your sample sentence. She thought the video game's graphics were far too violent and did not want her children to play it. So that's looking at the written or drawn definition, right? The graphics and the video game. Extra means outside, and I think this first word, extraordinary, helps you with that a lot. So if you break this down, extraordinary is how you pronounce it, but we've got this extra, which means outside, and we've got ordinary. So something extraordinary is outside the ordinary, or the definition they give you here, beyond what is usual. Your synonyms are remarkable and exceptional, and your antonyms are common and ordinary. Your sample sentence says this year's fireworks display in Newburyport was extraordinary, as the town had purchased better fireworks than ever before. Similarly, this is an extraordinary sunset. It is much prettier than normal. Your next word is extrapolate, which is a verb, and it means to make a guess based on what is already known. So in thinking about the definition of that root extra, we have something that's already known, and then to extrapolate means you're drawing conclusions outside of what is known. Your synonyms are deduce and hypothesize. And your sample sentence is, using the known data and the results of the controlled field study, the scientists tried to extrapolate what would happen if the disease were released to a much larger population. So the scientist is hypothesizing or making guesses or predictions about what's going to happen. So hypothesize is a really good synonym. You can also say something like predict as a synonym for extrapolate. Ject means throw, and your first word is interject, which means to insert between other things. And this is almost always used in the sense of talking. So it's to insert a comment into a conversation, right, or between other people's comments. Your synonyms are interrupt and intervene. Intervene, you'll remember, we've looked at already. And the you may remember tells you that inter means between. So to interject a thought is literally to throw it between other comments, right? So again, we have this idea that interjecting is about comments. Your sample sentence is, during the cross-examination, the judge had to interject and explain to the witness that he did not have to answer the attorney's inappropriate questions. So the judge had to interrupt or break in. Your next word is objectivity, which is a noun, and it's the state of being uninfluenced by opinions or bias and relying solely on fact. So your synonyms are impartiality and neutrality. You have a picture of a referee over here because referees need to be objective, or they need to show objectivity because they need to call a fair game. Your antonyms are bias and opinion, right? So if someone is not objective, they may have a bias, or they may have an opinion. When you're looking for objectivity in in people like referees, in people like judges, in people like reporters, who are just supposed to rely on the facts rather than their opinions. Another antonym that you might hear going along with objectivity is subjectivity. So if you're subjective, then you're biased or you have opinions, you're not objective. Your sample sentence is: the teacher always graded his students using absolute objectivity, never allowing his feelings about the students to interfere with his grading. So you would also hope that your teachers were objective or showed objectivity when they are assigning your grades.